2-liter engine putting out 240 horsepower. Butter smooth 6-speed manual transmission. Rear wheel drive. And best of all, VTEC. The S2000 is Honda's superior roadster that absolutely demolished the competition at the time. And it's sad that it had to leave in 2009. But is it coming back? Is the Honda S2000 gonna make a return? Today we will be talking about that and many more things on this episode of Car Talk. Let's get into it. Before we get into today's episode, I'd like to have a quick word from our sponsor. So there are absolutely no sponsors for today, but I do have an announcement. Do you have a cool Honda? Do you want me to drive your cool Honda? Please say yes. I'm looking for some cars to review for my channel. If you're in the Houston area and you have a cool car, especially a cool Honda, don't be afraid. DM me on Instagram at vtecBowers or drop a comment. The Honda S2000 was undeniably ahead of its time in the sense that more people want them now than they did on initial release. It's actually regarded as one of the best driver's cars ever. But why is that? Let's dive quickly into the history of the S2000 in order for you guys to understand. The S2000 actually derives from a long line of S cars. Well, not really that long, but they do date all the way back to the 60s. Those being the S500, S600, and S800. The S500 was very short-lived, only being produced for 1 year, due to concerns that its 531cc engine was too underpowered. The S600 was introduced in order to replace the S500 and came packed with a 606cc engine. Now, funnily enough, this car only lasted 1 extra year than the S500. The S800 was introduced shortly after in order to replace the S600 and came ready with a whopping 791cc engine. This car was produced the longest of the 3 elder S cars, with a whopping 4-year production run, which is pretty normal for today's standards, honestly. These cars were all very similar in style, but the most successful of the 3 was the S600. The S800 was intended to be shipped to the United States, considering the changes they made to it, like left-hand drive, but it just never went through. And with the loss of the United States market, the S800 just couldn't meet the expectations like the S600, thus inciting its cancellation in 1970. These cars were fairly nuts for their time, especially today's time. All 3 cars had a redline of 9,500 RPM, and they could rev out to 11,000 RPM if you wanted to. They are tied for first for highest revving production car, tied with the LFA. But sadly, having a bonkers high redline wasn't enough to keep these cars in production. Honda wouldn't produce another S car until, you guessed it, the S2000 came out. The S2000 was Honda's way of celebrating 50 years of the automobile company existing. And boy did they celebrate hard. The S2000 was better in every single way compared to its predecessors, which of course you'd hope so given that they had 30 years of technological and mechanical advancements behind them. But what I mean by better in every way is that Honda got the original spirit of the S cars, put it into this car, and expanded on it in the best ways possible. 240 horsepower out of a 2-liter engine, naturally aspirated. This was the highest horsepower per liter ever, and it had to be beaten out by Ferrari. 9,000 RPM rev limit, so this car is screaming just like its grandfather's. 50-50 weight distribution, which allowed it to have an even more raw driving experience. 6-speed manual transmission, standard, no automatic. And the best part of all? VTEC. On paper, this car seemed perfect. And the people who have driven the car, they would tell you that it is perfect. This car also didn't have any type of traction control or vehicle stability assist at all initially, so you really had to know what you were doing with this car. Of course, there are little issues here and there like oil consumption while in VTEC, but that was fixed down the line in later production years. The only gripe that I think anyone would have with the S2000 is the Off Throttle Oversteer. Now, in order to explain Off Throttle Oversteer or Snap Oversteer, whatever you want to call it, I'm gonna try to use Microsoft Paint. So whenever a car is moving, the weight of the car is usually pushed towards the back, or more weight on the back wheels. So that explains why whenever you're in a front wheel drive car, you get like massive wheel hop whenever you're launching the car or something, because the car is like kinda, you could say, at an angle in a sense, but not really. So whenever you stop accelerating, the weight of the car is pushed towards the center again, or whatever its neutral position is. So imagine you're approaching a corner in a rear-wheel drive car, and you get to about this point right here, and you're turning the corner, and you completely let off the throttle. Now, remember how I said whenever you're accelerating, the back wheels have more weight on them than the front wheels. So whenever you let off, the car is going to try to return to its neutral, whatever weight distribution that is, and then the back wheels are going to lose more traction. So whenever you're turning the corner and you let off, the back wheels lose traction and you spin out. So essentially, Liftoff Oversteer is literally just your back wheels over-rotating whenever you let off the gas. This isn't a Honda S2000 specific issue. Other cars have this too, like the Dodge Viper, which is infamous for trying to kill people who are driving it. But have no fear, with a little bit of driver mod, you can mitigate Liftoff Oversteer really easily. 2004 rolls around and it's time for the S2000 to be revised. The AP2 S2000 is released and it comes with a higher displacement 2.2 liter F22C engine with the lower rev limit at 8,200 RPM sacrifice in order to get more torque. Now, one thing I forgot to mention, just because it's not necessarily a big issue, is that the AP1 S2000 is pretty much torqueless. The AP1 S2000 owners that I've talked to say that they can literally feel VTEC kick in, because that's where the torque actually comes on. The AP2 S2000 was a little bit more mature, less crazy snappy, less chance of off throttle oversteer. Still a good car, but a little less raw feeling. 2006 rolls around and the AP2 S2000s finally get vehicle stability assist. Optional though. Things seem to be going great for this car, up until the 2008 recession, in which Honda realized that this niche market of a two-door sports car wasn't really worth the investment anymore. 2009 saw the last S2000 production and the S2000 was placed to rest. After the recession, it just seemed that Honda started to lose their original touch with the sporty racing cars. They began to phase out coupes. Their engines with the original 3-low VTEC system seemed to phase out too. With EPA restrictions and the company moving towards more family-friendly, efficient, daily driver cars, it seemed like we would never get another sporty, high-revving S2000 type car ever again. 2015 rolls around though, and the line of S cars actually reawakens in Japan. The S660 is a K car, and it surely is an anomaly, I'll tell you. The car comes packed with a turbo inline 3-cylinder making about 63 horsepower. Honda using an inline 3-cylinder? That's pretty strange. But the real anomaly here is that the car actually revs pretty high. Now keep in mind that the last high revving Honda that us US people ever received was the 8th Gen SI with the 8,000 RPM rev limit. So for Honda to still be doing high revving cars in 2015 at about 7,700 RPM is actually pretty strange. So it's nice to see that in the spirit of the S car, they actually were able to make the car rev high and still be turbo, meet emission standards. The craziest part is that this car is still being produced to date. So a 2022 Honda is revving past 7,000 RPM. That's pretty cool. With the S660 being the way it is, it just proves that if Honda were to revive the S2000 today, they could keep the spirit of the S cars alive. So after all the information I presented today, do we think that the S2000 will be revived, or at least should be? I think it should. The new BRZ, the new GR86, the Miata, even the new Supra, what do those cars have in common? Two-door coupe sports cars. They even come with manual transmissions too. Although it's a niche market, they still exist. They still have customers willing to buy. Honda claims that coupes don't sell. I think that they don't sell when it comes to cars like the Honda Civic or the Accord, just because it's supposed to be a daily driver sort of car. Really, I think that when you have a sport-oriented specific model, like these 4 cars that I literally just named, they will sell. Now, if you're trying to sell coupe versions of your normal sedan cars, they probably won't sell as much. Think about it. You have let's say a Civic Coupe. Are you gonna buy a Civic Coupe because you want it to be more sporty, or are you gonna buy the specific coupe sport-oriented model that Honda sells? I believe having at least one coupe model on the market wouldn't do much harm. The NSX doesn't even count because the general consensus can't even afford that car. So all in all, I believe the S2000, if it were to come back, would survive in today's climate. But what would that car look like? Let's dive into that. If you didn't know, Honda released a 20th S2000 anniversary front bumper. And as far as the styling for this new S2000 would go, I think a rendition of that bumper would work just fine. The rear, everything probably would be fine. The styling of the S2000 is not dated at all, surprisingly. Now let's talk mechanicals. For the power plant, it just will probably have to be a rendition of the K20C engines, just because they're literally putting that in almost every car these days. I could see them doing like a very super base model version with the L15 from the Civic Si. You're definitely gonna have to keep the car rear wheel drive though, so they would have to develop some parts in order to make that work, but it's not something out of the picture. Honestly, the most likely thing that they would do if they do release an S2000 would do K20C engines and maybe release like a limited edition like the Type R. Sort of would be like the equivalent to like the AP2 Club Racer sort of thing, weight reductions, all that, or to make the car more track oriented. But let's get creative here. Let's say for some odd reason they decided to introduce a whole new engine family. What if they made a fully fledged inline 3 turbo like in the S660? This is definitely more unlikely than them even bringing back the S2000, honestly, but it would be fun to see them do something crazy like that. Before the video ends, here's some quick Honda S2000's fun facts. This is the 1995 Honda Sport Study model, the concept car which the S2000 was based on. This car was planned to have a 2-liter 5-cylinder engine, so we could have had a 5-cylinder Honda S2000. The naming scheme of the Honda S2000 has nothing to do with the production year that it was released in. It actually has to do with the displacement of the engine, 2000 being 2 liters. Same goes with the old cars too. The S500 was actually half a liter, S600, you can guess 0.6 liters, S800, 0.8 liters. The S660, can you guess, 0.66 liters. And finally, there are rumors that the Honda S2000 is supposedly going to return in 2025 in order to celebrate Honda's 75th anniversary. Now, I really hope we see that. With all that being said, this has been vtecBowers S2000 Car Talk. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you didn't, leave. I'm joking. If you liked the video, like it, share it, you know. See you guys later. Peace.